grateful that the sun is shining today. It's the cold weather reminds us of the season. And yesterday, being Sunday, we celebrated Christ the King. But it was also another special day to remember. And a lot of people reminded me, and some of the words that we heard yesterday reminded us, that it was Stir Up Sunday. And that's the day when Christmas puddings are made. So it got me thinking, let's talk about that. So how did the Christmas pudding come about? Well, it was believed that its origins date back to the 1300s. Well, that's on record. It might have gone back before then, but history has it's around about the 1300s. And of course, the pudding wasn't as it was, as we know of as today. It was more of a porridge made from mutton and beef. Yes, it had wine in it, but it was sort of the consistency, it had a soupy consistency, so it was more of a savoury soup. Yes, known as frumenty. And because we're coming into Advent, very much like Lent, Advent is a time for fasting. So they believed that this mixture, it was the last feast before people would go into their fast. Anyway, by the 1595, it had developed, and it was very much more of a plum pudding that we know of today. And they said that between, I'll get these dates right, 1650 and 1654, it was seen as very much the Christmas classic. So people would sit down on Christmas Day and have this pudding. It was still very much a savoury element to it, with the suet, and I think there was still meat and things involved in it, but it was definitely more of the Christmas classic. But of course, someone has to come and spoil the show, and in 1664, the Puritans thought you can't have all this jollification at Christmas, so the pudding was actually banned. So that was it. That was the end of the pudding. But it was thought that round about the year 1714, the German King George, he reinstated it. And then, of course, as we know, the Victorians loved Christmas, because they always say that they brought Christmas in, and it was certainly back on the table, so to speak, at that time. And of course, you're wondering, what's all this, is there any religious connotations involved in this? Well, yes, there are, because the Stir Sunday is very Anglican in its tradition, because those of you who would have heard the post-communion collect of yesterday, which was the Book of Common Prayer of 1549, and as the words say, "Stir up, we beseech thee, O Lord, the wills of thy faithful people." So, of course, that's subsequently coined to represent the act of stirring up a good old Christmas pudding. So I presume, that's where that came from. Of course, the stirring is an important part, and you're supposed to stir from east to west, which signifies the way the wise men travelled to meet the baby Jesus. And of course, like everything, there are numerous theories regarding the stirring. It should always be clockwise and not anti-clockwise. because anti-clockwise sees it as stirring up the devil. It's amazing how these things materialise, isn't it? And some thought the way you stirred the pudding mirrored the way people thought the sun orbited the earth at that time. And stirring was very much a tradition because it was when the family got together. And certainly I remember as a child being brought into the kitchen and said, "Oh, you must stir the pudding." And you had to stir it, and every family member was made to stir the pudding, and you said your wish. And if I'm not mistaken, a couple of years ago there was quite a thing with the Queen and our present King, our late Queen, our present King, and young George and the Prince of Wales. They all got together and it was filmed, them all stirring the Christmas pudding. So you see, tradition is passed down. And then of course I've already mentioned that the ingredients, because the pudding would have started with the savoury element, but as the years progressed there was various elements, and of course they said there had to be 13 ingredients, and the 13 symbolised Jesus and his 12 disciples. And then the holly on top of the pudding, and the holly represents the crown of thorns placed on Jesus' head. And of course we love the pyrotechnics on a Christmas day when we flash up the brandy and flame the pudding. That's, the oohs and ahs, that's the big thing. People's eyebrows being burnt, what have you. Well, that originates apparently. People believed that signified Jesus' love and power. So there you are. Then, of course, what about the tradition of putting things in the pudding? And there was the adding the sixpence. That was the big thing, to add the sixpence. I think in our family we would scrub the sixpence, it would go in. I know some people were quite, oh, that's awful, that, and they would wrap it up carefully in a piece of greaseproof paper. But I think, in our family, the sixpence went in. But of course, the idea was that if you found the sixpence, it brought you luck. Well, hopefully you didn't bite onto it and break your teeth. And I think there's been issues of people choking on it. All part and parcel of the fun and games of the Christmas pudding. But then, way back in sort of medieval times, they put things in like the bachelor's button and the old maid's thimble. Sounds a bit grim, doesn't it? But apparently if a single man or woman were the unfortunate recipients of these, it meant that they would spend a year of being on their own, and the misfortune would be that they would not find their true love and be married. All very grim for Christmas. And then of course there was the idea of a ring. I suppose that would probably be if you were a little bit more well off, because that would bring you riches and good fortune, and of course marriage. The Christmas pudding, I think, today is, I know there's still a lot of people make them, but I don't think it's quite as popular as it was, mainly because it takes hours of steaming to make this pudding. And I think we're all very acutely aware of our fuel costs these days, and certainly steamy kitchens. And we just have to go into a supermarket and there are gazillion puddings to be bought. So I think the idea of the costs, the making, the convenience, that all comes into play now. And also the way they've produced them. Certainly the ready-made ones, I think when they first brought them out, you still was recommended that you steam them, but of course now it's all microwave, all designed to save fuel. But there you go. So there was so many songs produced for the pudding, and I guess there's lots of poems, and I really only scratched the surface regarding the traditions of this pudding. But whatever your tradition, you can't avoid that wonderful Christian message behind this pudding. So whether you are still a traditionalist and you sat yesterday and made your pudding and you spent 8 hours steaming it, or bringing all the family in and you sharing that stirring of the pudding, or perhaps you've already bought your pudding from your supermarket. Hopefully, when the time comes to eat it, you'll be in company. But if not, if you're on your own, just perhaps you can think for a moment behind all this wonderful tradition of how the pudding was made, and what, over the generations, how many people have enjoyed the making and eating of this pudding. But really, the meaning behind it, that Christian meaning behind it, and that meaning is love. God's love that he so generously gives us, that wonderful feeling of love. God bless, and enjoy your pudding.
It was Christmas Day in the kitchens of a large West End hotel, and from those steaming kitchens came the most delightful smell. And following that smell came the chef's voice, loud and clear, singing the song he always sings on Christmas Day each year. The Irish folk eat Irish stew. Yorkshire pud. The Indian eats his curry, and it's very, very good. Oh, dear me. The Scots all eat their haggis. Miss Muffet, curds and whey. But they'll all eat Christmas pudding today. The Cockneys feed like parrots on boiled beef and carrots. All winkles what they gets from Pegwell Bay. And if it's like a change they feels, they stuff themselves with jellied eels. But they'll all eat Christmas pudding today. In France it's thank heaven for a little frogs and snails. They go down in the most delightful way. They all eat frogs' legs over there. That's why they all get mal de mer. So they'll all eat Christmas pudding today. All over Italy they eat quite prettily stringy spaghetti. It's a very good, but when it's Christmas Day, no vermicelli, no hot on your Nelly. It's a Christmas pud. Come on, listen to my story about a man named Jed. Poor mountaineer barely kept his family fed. All year round they eat possum when it's stewed, excepting for today when Granny gives them pew. Ding, that is, Christmas style. black gold. Yes, sirree. In Wales they eat Welsh rabbit, from Porthcawl to Llanelli, and sometimes yellow jelly, or perhaps it's yechlo jelly. In Mayfair they eat caviar in a quite abandoned way, but they'll all eat Christmas pudding to dine.
In Australia they eat kangaroo. It's a very tasty meat. It really is remarkable. You burp and jump 10 feet. But now each jolly swagman's shoved his tucker bag away,
'cause they'll all eat Christmas pudding to dine. Christmas pudding, listen to the sleigh bells ring. Christmas pudding surely is the thing, and whatever you eat, for meat or for sweet, in the normal way, I'll bet you'll all eat Christmas pudding today.